Daniel's prosthetic hand trembled as he entered the cargo bay of the passenger frigate, the neural interface misfiring again. 3 years since the Proxima campaign, and the phantom pain still came in waves. The military psychiatrist had recommended a companion, something to ease the transition back to civilian life on the outer colonies. The program was simple. Veterans received bonding credits for approved species. Most chose Terran cats or dogs, modified for low-gravity environments. He hadn't expected a cage. The container sat in the center of the bay, 2 meters tall and reinforced with titanium bars, the kind used for transporting dangerous wildlife or high-security prisoners. Through the gaps, Daniel saw movement, something pale and shimmering that definitely wasn't a domesticated animal. "There's been a mistake," Daniel said to the dockworker, a grizzled woman with cybernetic eyes that whirred as they focused. "No mistake. Daniel Reeves, veteran ID 7749 Delta," she consulted her tablet. "Companion assignment approved and paid. Sign here." Daniel's working hand, the flesh and blood one, clenched. "I requested a therapy animal, not whatever that is." The dockworker shrugged. "Above my pay grade, you want it or not. I've got 12 more deliveries today." Something in the cage whimpered. The sound was unmistakably intelligent, unmistakably afraid. Daniel had heard enough fear during the war to recognize it in any language or species. "I'll take it," he heard himself say. The dockworker had the cage loaded onto an auto cart before Daniel could reconsider. As it hummed down the corridor toward his temporary quarters in the station's habitation ring, Daniel walked alongside, trying to get a better look at its occupant. She was humanoid mostly. Pale blue skin caught the overhead lights, refracting them like oil on water. Her frame was delicate, almost fragile, but her eyes were what stopped Daniel cold. They were entirely silver, without visible pupils, and they tracked him with an intelligence that made his stomach twist. Those weren't the eyes of a pet. Those were the eyes of a person. His quarters were standard veteran housing, 20 square meters of recycled air and beige walls. The cage barely fit through the door. Once inside, Daniel dismissed the cart and stood awkwardly, staring at the imprisoned woman. "Computer translate," he said, hoping the station's AI could bridge whatever linguistic gap existed. The woman in the cage spoke, her voice melodic and layered with harmonics no human throat could produce. The computer chirped, "Translation unavailable. Language pattern does not match known databases." Daniel knelt slowly, bringing himself to eye level with her. Up close, he could see she wore what remained of ornate clothing, shredded silk in deep purples and golds, jewelry that appeared to be grown rather than forged, wrapped around her wrists like living vines. "My name is Daniel," he said slowly, pointing to himself. "Daniel." She watched him, unmoving. He pointed to her, "You." For a long moment, nothing. Then hesitantly she pressed a hand to her chest. Her voice came out as a whisper of chimes. "Orla." "Orla," Daniel repeated. The name felt right on his tongue, like it had always belonged there. She nodded once, then retreated to the far corner of the cage, wrapping her arms around her knees. The gesture was so human, so vulnerable, that Daniel felt something crack in his chest. He pulled out his personal comm and started making calls. 3 hours later, Daniel had answers and they made him sick. The companion program had been compromised 6 months ago. Shell corporations with ties to the consortium, the same mega-conglomerate that had funded the Proxima campaign, had infiltrated the system. They were trafficking sentient beings under the guise of the Veteran Support Initiative, moving them through legitimate channels where no one would look twice. Orla wasn't cargo, she was contraband. The source Daniel found, a former intelligence officer named Martinez who still owed him a favor, had been reluctant to share more. "The ones they're moving now are high value," Martinez had said over the encrypted channel. "Royalty from uncontacted civilizations. The consortium wants leverage for resource negotiations. You've got yourself a diplomatic incident, Reeves. A princess, Daniel had said flatly. If that's what her people call it. Listen, you need to dump this problem now, before it dumps on you. But Daniel had already ended the call. He sat on the floor across from the cage, his back against the wall. Orla watched him with those silver eyes, still terrified but no longer cowering. I'm not going to hurt you, Daniel said. He knew she couldn't understand the words, but maybe she'd understand the tone. And I'm not letting anyone else hurt you either. He stood and approached the cage's locking mechanism. It was biometric, keyed to his fingerprints. Of course, they'd made sure only the registered owner could open it. The irony wasn't lost on him. The cage door swung open with a pneumatic hiss. Orla didn't move. It's okay, Daniel said, stepping back to give her space. You're free. Well, as free as either of us can be on this station. She emerged slowly, testing each movement as if expecting a trap. When she finally stood at full height, she was taller than him by half a head, her frame willowy and graceful despite weeks or months of captivity. She looked at the open door, then at Daniel, then back at the door. Yeah, Daniel said. That's the problem. We're on a space station, can't exactly walk out the airlock. Orla circled the small room, touching surfaces with careful fingers. She paused at the viewport, staring out at the stars. Her hand pressed against the glass, and Daniel saw her shoulders shake. She was crying. No sound, but the tremors were unmistakable. Daniel's prosthetic hand clenched involuntarily, the phantom pain flaring. He'd spent 3 years fighting a war he didn't believe in, following orders he knew were wrong, because that was what soldiers did. He'd told himself he'd left that person behind when they medically discharged him. But here was another order to follow. Look the other way, let the system handle it, don't ask questions. Computer, Daniel said. Access station directory. I need the location of the Galactic Union Embassy. The AI responded instantly. The Galactic Union maintains a consular office in Section 7, Level 3. Current status, open. Orla turned from the viewport, her silver eyes questioning. Daniel offered his flesh hand, a gesture of peace, of partnership. We're going to get you home. I don't know how yet, but we're going to figure it out. She stared at his hand for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and took it. Her skin was cool and smooth like polished stone, but her grip was strong. They stood there, human veteran and alien princess, 2 prisoners of different wars, holding on to each other in the cold, artificial light of the space station. Outside the viewport, the stars burned with indifferent fire, and somewhere in that vast darkness was a world that was waiting for one of its daughters to come home. Daniel had expected a companion to help him heal from his past. Instead, he'd found a mission, maybe the first one in years that actually mattered. First things first, he said, releasing her hand and moving to his personal locker. He pulled out his old military jacket, the one with the medals he never wore. We need to make you less conspicuous. He draped it over her shoulders. It hung awkwardly on her taller frame, but it covered the distinctive jewelry and torn royal garments. Orla touched the fabric, then looked at him with something that might have been gratitude. All right, Daniel said, checking the charge on his plasma sidearm. Technically illegal for civilians, but no one had asked him to turn it in. Let's go start a diplomatic incident. As they stepped into the corridor, Daniel's prosthetic hand finally stopped trembling. Maybe, he thought, this was what healing actually looked like. Not forgetting the war, but choosing what you'd fight for next. Behind them, the empty cage sat with its door open, a monument to all the prisons people built, and all the ways those prisons could be broken. And